Hello and welcome to the State of Events, where event professionals connect.
Welcome, everyone. I know that we're all still coming in to the webinar. So as you gather your bearings, I am going to just introduce today, open us up and get started. Welcome from near and far. Hey, if you're in the chat, would you please, Karen, as our chat host, would you please go ahead and just shout out where you're from? Like, why not? Come on, Oregon in the house. We have like 3 representing Oregon today that I know of. Oregon's trying to get that mental health right. Good job, Oregon. So great. I know we have some, we're heavy California today. We got some California folks, but I think we have a few from, I know we have one from the East Coast, or at least the 3-hour time difference. I'm assuming they're the East Coast. Bronx, come on, Bronx. Bronx logging in from Oregon. I love it. Welcome. Well, wherever you are joining from, we are excited to have you. Thank you so much. If you are part of our TSO community, welcome. We have been so excited curating all of this wonderful content this month for Mental Health Awareness Month, coming to an end in May. But my name is Sonia Alcazar Collier, and I am the founder and host of the State of Events podcast and online community. TSO is about growing a global online community for event professionals. This was a pivot opportunity for myself, and I reached out to some of my event professionals and said, hey, during this time where the event world is closed down, in essence, opening back up now, of course, would you come on a journey with me and just provide content for our industry while they are in the virtual space now? And so that hasn't left for us. We're growing this community, and our efforts here is that we would help to connect the event industry, strengthen their network, collaborate with them, and ultimately cultivate a holistic approach to all that you do, as whether it be a small business, entrepreneur, event professional. It happens to be filled with people who are independent contractors most of the time, work in business for themselves. And so that's what this community is about. It's just growing you, resourcing you, and that does pertain to your mind, body, and soul. Without any further ado, I would love to introduce our last and final guest panel. It's over. You are last, bringing it in. And I'm so thankful for you. We have Miss Jasmyn Smith Abernathy. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, providing individual, couples, and family therapy. Her concentration is typically in overwhelming emotions, relationship conflict, social and performance anxiety, and burnout work-life balance. Welcome, Jasmyn.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Pastor Anthony Powell. Pastor Anthony is the founding pastor of Redeemed Life Church. He has over 10 years of experience in dealing with issues of recovery and mental health. As a dynamic communicator of God's word, he is celebrated for his sound biblical teaching that is infused with creativity, humor, and practical wisdom. Welcome, Pastor Anthony.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. And then we have my sister from another mister, as I like to say, Miss Noosha Khali. Noosha began her journey with traditional Chinese medicine at the Acupressure Institute in Berkeley, California. Come on, Bay Area, where she learned Chinese medical massage and advanced acupressure. She obtained her master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine from the Academy of Chinese Culture and Health Sciences in Oakland, California. Welcome, Noosha.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and everybody else. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Love it. All right, let's jump right in. So the panel today, we're talking about trauma and healing. And what better way to approach things holistically than to have a mind, body, and soul approach? I want to start first with Jasmyn. Can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed in the state of California. Over the past year, I've been working with people all over the state. Generally, I'm working in person with people in the Torrance area. So if you know where that is, South Bay of LA County. Like Sonia mentioned, I work with emotional dysregulation that can look like anything on, suicide spectrum, just really difficult emotional experiences for individuals, as well as couples and families. So I work with teens all the way up to later adulthood with individuals, couples, and families. And so relationship conflict, any relationship struggles, I target that. Also anxiety, specifically social anxiety, performance anxiety. And I also like to work a lot with folks on burnout and work-life balance. We see a lot of that in, where we live, and generally just today's society. Lots of folks are working a lot and just stressed. So I teaching a lot of coping skills, helping people manage and have more balance in their life. And when I'm not doing that, I enjoy spending time with my family. I have a little dog at home that I love to hang out with that has been a great companion during this pandemic. Recently got married during the pandemic. So it's been a lot going on. Eager to travel again. That's one of my life passions. Love getting around the world and just exploring new things. So that's a little bit about me.
And Pastor Anthony, what keeps you busy over there in Azusa, California?
You know it. Man, I'm such an honor to be a part of this. Thank you for inviting me into this safe and brave space where we get to talk about issues that I think are not just important, but biasly very dear to my heart. So I'm a pastor in Azusa, California. That's in the San Gabriel Valley. I planted Redeemed Life Church with my boo, my bae, my bride, my baby mama in January 2015. The little uniqueness to our story that Sonia is referring to is we actually have 15-year-old triplets, which we love. They're the best in the world, but have a pandemic surprise. And we found that my wife is now pregnant, 15-year gap. Apparently we didn't social distance well, but hey, praise God for helping me. I just keep it real. That's who I am. And so we're now expecting our fourth child, which we're really excited about. But really what I see as a passion in my life is to reach the broken, love the lost, and care like Christ. So what I really feel like I specialize in doing is seeing other people win in their calling in the faith communities, specifically the Christian community. So I like to champion people and advocate for what their needs are and finding their place and their purpose that is bigger than themselves. Obviously, I'm a pastor, so I preach. So I talk about the connection to the God of the Bible, Jesus Christ, how that interacts with every aspect of life, whether that's family, whether that's work, whether that's issues of recovery. The reason why our church is entitled Redeemed Life Church is it comes out of our own story. We were broken down, toe up from the flow up, tossed out, discarded by the world, and found our hope in Christ. And our redemption story comes from our faith belief, but also some very real wise practical tools that we find in the world through the people that God has created to help each other out, to help us along. So that's important to me.
Well, you are going to have 3 helpful children to be lending a hand as you re-up for round 2. I'm so excited at that face. I love it. Noosha, I'm sure some acupuncture will be in order if you ever find yourself in Azusa in the next couple of months. Noosha, please tell us a little bit about you and your practice.
Great. Thank you again for having me a part of this panel. I think it's a very important topic that we need to be having more discussions about. And I've told Sonia, I actually used to be in the event background. I have a background. I used to be in luxury hotels, did a lot of catering, love food, love people. But acupuncture was my true calling. I'm very lucky that it was something that I chose, but it also chose me. My background, most of my training has been from the Bay Area. I'm originally from Iran, but grew up in the Bay Area. Training has been in Oakland and in Berkeley. I've been in the profession for about 10 years now. And I focus a lot on pain, orthopedic, sports acupuncture pain. I see it as it gets people in to kind of try acupuncture. If you're not able to be mobile and you can't move around, it kind of impacts your quality of life. But as I've been practicing, I've noticed that I actually tend to easily pull out kind of the physical, the emotional traumas and things that are coming up during the session. Like I'll get into that a little bit later about how impactful Chinese medicine is in trying to heal, to get some of those traumas and emotions out of the body. And we don't separate physical ailments from emotions. And so it's just been really great how people have had more transformations, the more I kind of able to get them to go into different areas of their experience. And that's what I really enjoy, because putting all those pieces together really brings out this feeling of overall well-being, right? Like we're not just one little particle, we're like holistic beings and we have so many different parts to us. So I see my role as facilitating a conversation between all of those parts.
Thank you, Noosha. I love how you break down the work that you do in the mind, body, soul connection is a big deal when we talk about mental health, because I think that there are, just in my own health journey, have realized that our brain traps physical connection. And so when you're able to draw the connection with what your body has physically experienced due to trauma or an event, that can be a huge missing piece of the puzzle for people. So thank you for the work that you do and for the awareness that you spread. My first question to that point then, Jasmyn, I want to start with you in your profession. How do you define trauma? And how would trauma be defined differently on the therapeutic side of what you do?
Yeah, because of my training and just like my, I guess, evolution and understanding trauma, I really define it as, most mental health practitioners would. I would say that any adverse life experience that manifests negatively, so your experience or, sometimes your thoughts, memories, experiences that kind of jog your mind as far as those past events have happened. And so this is usually impairing daily functioning or other domains of our lives, including relationships and activities of daily living, such as, being afraid to go someplace or do something such as like speak in front of a crowd, different things like that. And so trauma it's such a big spectrum. And I just usually think of it as something that has had some significantly impairing negative impact.
And Pastor Anthony, how about for you? How would you define trauma?
Very similar to the way that Jasmyn defined trauma, very much along those same lines. As I find myself talking to people within my context, I'll often share trauma as any extraordinary event, any challenge, any issue of brokenness, any climactic thing that has happened in your life that has caused you to be paralyzed, to do the things that you feel called to do. You feel trapped, you feel isolated, or for whatever reason, you're just not living life at your best. And how we can deliver someone or reduce that trauma so that they can be all that God has created them to be.
Love that. And Noosha, how about for you? How would you define trauma? And more specifically, can you give some of our attendees some perspective on trauma physically, right? So impact, and then other types of trauma that you come across.
I would agree with everybody else on the panel that yes, it's usually an outside event, and it's most likely negative too. But from a physical, one example I like to use is a car accident. That moment when it could be a minor one, it could be more a traumatic one. What happens to the body is the body experiences like shock, because that's how it like braces itself for the impact, right? What people don't realize is that shock to the system actually stays in the body if it's not like dispelled in some way. And that can create issues further, like later in life in different ways. And you've noticed there's a lot of people that have had a car accident, like maybe they've never been the same since then, or it's just kind of jolted whatever was already there. So that's like really good, like a contextual example that we can think about. Okay, like it was actual physical trauma. And then this doesn't also, there's also other aspects, physical trauma, things that are kind of, I call it stuck in the body, like stuck energy in different places of the body. And I'll get into this more about what that looks like physically, like signs and symptoms and what that is like physiologically. But yeah, that shock, we think of it also, the Chinese medical system has like 12 different systems. It's related to Western medical science, but we kind of have our own version of like each of those organs do. So this really shocks the kidney system, and kidney is kind of really related to fear. All the organs have an emotion related to it. So that fear could also create not so much like a physical issue, but just fear of moving forward in your life after certain trauma. It might be like an accident or anything else. So it really is like emotions, physical traumas that are stuck in the body.
Definitely can't wait to get to drawing some connections for people. I go to reflexology, and my reflexologist is a whiz, and she'll touch my foot and she'll apply pressure to it. And she'll say like something like, "Are you feeling sad this week?" And I'm like, "How did you know?" And she can see this manifest in my foot. So I love how this truly is a holistic connection. This is sort of an open question. In supporting people through trauma or crisis, what are some basic post-traumatic behaviors that you've discovered? And for instance, what I'm kind of referring to here is, let's say that there's physical or mental abuse that might manifest as trust issues, right? Looking to sort of understand here the cause and effect pattern of unhealthy behaviors. Or in another way, you could say, what does trauma do to us? And that makes us respond a certain way, right? So if I have this traumatic experience, what are some of the common things that I can do that I just do as a human, as a person who's responding to that? And then also, what are some of those things that you see come out of a traumatic experience? We can go off order here, whoever feels you want to answer that.
I can jump in. So I do a type of therapy that I think is amazing, and it has a lot of connection with the brain and how the brain stores trauma. It's called EMDR, stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the premise is that negative events can be kind of stuck in the brain. One of our panelists just mentioned this, but getting, I think, or Sonia, maybe you said it, but gets stuck in the brain, and it's basically stored with the original sight, smell, sensations, negative thoughts, all of those different aspects of our experience in a moment. And without being processed fully, that's what we see as a manifestation of a trigger, right? You hear people like saying that was triggering for me. And this can be a smell, a sight, a taste, something that has to do with one of the senses. And so when we have those negative experiences and they get locked in the brain and they're not processed in an adaptive way, that's the trauma, right? So what I see a lot, because I like to work a lot with relationships, whether I'm working with an individual or a couple, is a lot of emotional trauma. So things that have happened in early adulthood, a lot of times childhood, a lot of times with primary caregivers, resulting in emotional trauma later on in adult life. And I see that as, unhealthy attachments to other people, whether it's a romantic partner or just, friendships, new relationships with coworkers, things like that, chaotic, very disorganized relationships. We all may know some folks who have a tough time just being okay, like things are peaceful and they're like, what's going on? Like what's about to happen? And there's this unrest if things are peaceful because they could be used to chaotic patterns. I also see diminished self-esteem, unexplained emotional dysregulation, just, difficulty reeling in emotions and emotions just kind of having their way in one's life. So that's a lot of what I see in my practice. And I really enjoy working with that too.
I can share from my end. Oftentimes I'll find people within a faith community when they experience a traumatic event, the first thing they want to do is isolate. It's like, okay, I don't show weakness. And getting all of us to come to a place where we understand that a lot of the healing that we're going to encounter is actually going to come from outside other people that are trustworthy, that are safe. I can't express that enough, that are safe. And so kind of dispelling the lie, there's a saying in the recovery circles, you're only as sick as your secrets. This sense of shame, isolation, condemnation that leads people to, at some extremes, self-harm and suicidal ideation. But in some minor extremes, people just don't know, like, man, brah, you just disconnected, you out. Or sister friend, where'd you go? You're over there dealing with things on your own, and you're finding that it's just bringing a cascade of negative emotions that you're not able to process on your own because we were never created to process them on their own. So a lot of what I've experienced in ministry, I've led a recovery group over the course of well over a decade, bringing men and women together in separate circles to be able to expose their issues in a safe, brave space, knowing that they're not going to be judged. No one's there to fix you. No one's there going to diagnose you. You just get to be in community and let what we believe, the Spirit of God, begin to talk and do the healing. And within the context of community, find a place to be known. It's amazing what happens and how free you get when you realize, like, hey, I'm not the only person that deals with this stuff, and this in no way disqualifies me for the great things that God has for me. I've seen some of my greatest tragedies in life, things that I thought would bury me, things that I swore to myself, I will take this to my grave. Nobody will ever know this. That once exposed and brought to the light, then I'm able to not only receive the healing I need, but often forgiving myself, stepping out of the sense of worthlessness and in a sense of greater purpose. And then, oh, how my God works. He'll take that very tragedy, highlight it, and redeem it. That leads to other people stepping out into the light, feeling free to share what's going on with them. And next thing you know, you're truly experiencing a healing community that can lead to restoration.
That's so good. The visual that came to my mind when you just mentioned that last part, Pastor Anthony, was my son is learning. He's at an amazing school and he's learning, about emotions in a kindergarten type of way, right? So they're teaching him through imagery, and they use these dominoes, the dominoes that in much of my background has been to play at barbecues, but they use them in a very different way, and they line them up and they try to show the domino effect. And so I saw that when you said that, I saw the domino effect of it just takes one person to show that, hey, you can come and be vulnerable and you can come to the space and it's safe and you can get the care you need and it's actually going to help your life. And then hopefully the idea is that they knock someone else into the realization of that as well. And we have this domino effect of healing. I love that. Noosha, from your perspective, what are some of the sort of cause and effect features that you find?
I love what was shared. I think those are very, very kind of profound statements. And I think really important to shed light on those things. I think people show up with more physical ailments and they may not be aware of a lot of things. One of the things that I think is very impactful about acupuncture is the moment a needle goes in, your body is aware of it. I mean, they're not painful, but they're like, oh, hey, there's something in my hand here. So the body is aware of it, and then the mind is also aware of it. So in that moment, your mind and body are one. And that's a rare thing for us to be on the same page with all the time. And that happens with every other needle that's placed in the body. So then here you are in complete connection with your mind and body. And what comes out of that, like people cry on the table, like they have memories, things just kind of come out. Because one thing we don't also realize that like the traumas are actually embedded in our tissues. Our body, there's this thing in my field or just in massage therapy, like the body never forgets. So it holds it onto the tissues, and that's all chemical related to like how the brain reacted to that particular trauma. So when that happens, you're releasing all of these traumas, and like people didn't even expect. They're like, oh, I came in here for like my shoulder pain, and why am I like crying? Because it's like you were holding on to a lot of things, and that's something I'm actually very comfortable with, and I like facilitating. Obviously, you go where people are more comfortable going, but when I work, it's other things that are not necessarily just me. There's like a spiritual realm. Like we do create this like safe space, and I always say like, I don't like discount the fact that I'm putting sharp objects in you. Like there's no way around that, but I'm creating a safe space for you. Like I'm creating rapport and trust with you in this moment, in this space, in order for that to replicate any other relations you may have had. But in this space, you are safe, and it's an ability for you to express whatever you need, whatever is needed in that moment, right? And it's not something that you push or you schedule. It just kind of comes out, and it's part of the healing process. And I think a lot of people also come with like easy anger or easy crying, or chronic issues are usually related to a lot of like unprocessed trauma that you're aware of or not. Or there's this thing of like, well, Western medicine doesn't know what's wrong with me, or like nothing has worked, right? Like I always, when people come to me with that, I'm like, okay, like maybe we need to look at some of the emotional stuff. And I have the tools and space to do that. And that usually can be very powerful for people.
We're going to do a poll in a minute, but Noosha, that sparks a question for me. Do you sometimes get, and this is just literally, I just want to kind of see where acupuncture sometimes falls. And the majority of the people that you service, do you find that you are the first stop on their train toward their healing journey, or the last stop, somewhere in the middle? Where do you find them addressing some of these physical things?
That's a great question. I think it also is related to like geographically where you're located. I'm located in the Bay Area. We have there's 6 acupuncture schools in this area. So people are more open to it than maybe other parts of the country. But I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I've tried everything else and I've been told to try it, to try acupuncture. Usually it's someone else that they know that have tried it, or they've always been wanting to try it. And they're like, oh, I heard this would be a good place for me to come for acupuncture. So, you know, I think more and more people are seeking this alternative health, and might it be therapy or in other ways, like people are needing that because whatever they're getting is just, it's not fulfilling everything that they need. So I think I would say it varies. I think where my particular demographic where I am, people are more willing and like to try acupuncture. It varies, but yeah, more often than not, like they've tried other things too, and just like, oh, I want to try this, and that can include like chiropractic work, you know, other energy healing. There's so many different options that people can be using. But yeah, I kind of get somewhere in between all of that.
How about for the other of you, Jasmyn and Pastor Anthony, where do you find that when you're serving people, supporting people, where's your practice along their journey? Are you sometimes the first stop? Do you sometimes catch them in the middle?
I see a lot of people who, you know, it's their first time coming to therapy. And so what I love about where our health system is kind of going is doctors are now screening for depression and anxiety. And so I don't know if y'all have, you know, you may know someone who's gone to the doctor and they're like, oh, they were asking me these questions. And so usually, you know, part of the routine check-in is like a depression questionnaire of 9 questions or like an anxiety questionnaire of 7 questions. And from there, they're kind of like sifting out, like, would it be helpful for you to see a mental health professional? And so sometimes I get people who are funneled through that avenue. But I think a lot of folks now are being exposed to therapy, and we're having a lot more discussions about mental health, which I think is great. It's being normalized in a lot of different spaces. And so I do see a range of folks who it's their first time coming to therapy, and others who, you know, may have been recommended by their physician, and a lot of folks who just know friends or family members who've had experiences in therapy and they're just trying it out. So I think as far as like emotional well-being and emotional health and mental health, sometimes people do kind of just, you know, start the Google search. What do I do? A lot of times self-help books and things like that. And then they might, you know, realize they need someone to facilitate that process a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'd say for me, it too is on the spectrum. For those that grew up in a faith community, oftentimes the church is the first place that they turn in because God is the source of their hope. What I found, especially in my church context, and we live in a community that's near a couple universities. It's got a lot of young people that often are what we would call unchurched, have not experienced church at all. They can come when they're at their like, this is my last ditch effort. I've tried everything else. I've talked to everything else. I can't find what it is that's keeping me in this space of depravity. Like, and so if there is a God at all, like he needs to show up right now because this is my last stop or else I'm calling it quits sort of thing, which, you know, doesn't happen as often, but we've encountered those extremes. And I embrace all of them. Like oftentimes I'm like, it's usually when you're at the end of yourself that's where you actually find God. Because you're like, wait a second, I can't fix me. I need something greater than myself to fix me. And they're actually then open. Some of the greatest obstacles I have are our own intellects, our own way of trying to reason and figure out. And I even hear that and a lot of I love that when she was talking about acupuncture therapy and like things being hidden in your body and in your tissue, I'm like, yes. But like, you have to have someone explain that and often in ways before you make that connection. And I find sometimes it's like that with faith. You may have heard that phrase, sometimes you're so smart, you're dumb. Which I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but it's this thing of where we have to get beyond our own self, beyond our own ego, beyond our own hubris to actually humble ourselves to believe that we can actually be helped in a way that we can't control within our own means. And that's where I feel like for those that do choose to give it all over to God, give it all over to Jesus, experience what it is to have a relationship with a higher power, that freedom and transformation comes that is longstanding.
Transformation, you said it. We're going to stop there for the poll. Perfect time. Answer the poll on that note. I'm going to toss to Cara. She's going to do just a little interactive thing with our participants in a little poll question here.
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead and launch the poll right now. So give yourself a couple of seconds to answer it. And I'll do it now. So the question for the poll is, do you believe you have adequate access to mental health care? For example, therapy, counseling, or other types of soul care. Okay, give you a couple of seconds. Thank you so much.
I think it's still coming in. Let's see. Are we done? Oh no, it's still going.
Yep.
People still voting.
And we're good.
Awesome. All right. Well, at least for the sake of this webinar, we seem to have some people who are equipped, right? At least you have the tools to navigate whatever might be your need for your healthcare at this time. And so this is actually a very comforting result. 80% said yes, 20% said no, that they have adequate access to mental health care. That's great. That's great. And I think that, doing things like this, creating awareness, having different events, and just driving our efforts to really highlight the need for mental care is probably the reason why we have results like that. Love it. All right, transitioning here a bit, I want to just cover just some basic understanding of addictions, unhealthy habits, some of our hangups, some of our habitual patterns. And so, Jasmyn, from your perspective, how would you describe modern day addictions or an unhealthy habit, and particularly something that might not be as evident for someone, like, oh, I didn't know that gambling could turn into an addiction. So what are some of those that you can share light on?
Yeah, so I would say, any behavior that you are engaging in that results in some problems in your life, usually in some area of functioning, school, work, relationships, daily life stuff, that's a cause for concern, right? Where you're like, this is getting in the way and I'm noticing it. People are telling me this is a problem. That's a sign. But so I would say addiction, it can be classified as any ongoing pattern or pattern of use of something or a behavior that causes significant problems, like I was just mentioning. And I was doing a little bit of research, and according to Harvard Health, in a person who becomes addicted, the brain receptors become overwhelmed. So there's a really strong connection between the brain and behavior that's really notable and worthy to look at as far as addiction is concerned. And so what happens is the brain responds by producing less dopamine, that's our happy neurotransmitter, or it eliminates dopamine receptors. So a similar understanding to this might be like turning the volume down on a loudspeaker when the noise becomes too loud. So the brain is not functioning in the way that it was supposed to because of this chemical change. And so when we are constantly engaging in an addictive behavior, the brain is releasing less and less. And so it's like we're trying to get more and more of it. And so that's where the behavior comes from, right? Like we're constantly seeking that feeling that diminishes because the brain is overwhelmed. And so there's a behavioral component to addiction. There's also that chemical component as well.
Pastor Anthony, how about from your perspective, what are some forms of some modern day addictions?
Yeah, I couldn't have explained it better than Jasmyn. That was amazing. I think one form of addiction that often comes up in church life that I don't think people are highly aware of is this sense of approval addiction, what we would call codependency, because it sounds very Christian. It's like, oh, I constantly put everyone above myself and, I want to make sure that everybody else is taken care of. But essentially what we're doing is we're denying our own needs and our own trauma and our own desire for help. So it's that sense of I'm always going to be someone's savior and hey, it doesn't matter. So I'm being mistreated or so I'm being overlooked. Isn't that just a part of what it is to die to oneself as a Christian, as a believer? And so oftentimes in my circles, I'm coming into a space where I'm inviting someone to be their own advocate and that it's okay to not be okay, but it's actually okay to share when you disapprove of something. Like speaking the truth in love that somebody's hurting you does not make you selfish. It does not mean that you lack compassion for what somebody else is going through. It simply means that you actually find worth in yourself in the way that God has created you to be at the same level and pace in which somebody else holds worth in what God has created them to be. And so when I find that somebody is battling codependency, often they are very heavily depressed. Often they don't even know what they like anymore. It's that person that says, you know, hey, where do you want to go to eat? Wherever you like, whatever you want to do. It's like codependent. No, it's okay. And I say that because I feel like in many ways I was the president of the codependent club. My wife tells funny stories when we were early married. I was so into pleasing people and not causing waves that we'd go out to dinner and I'd order fish. They'd bring me a steak and I'd be like, oh, it's fine. And she's like, you ordered fish. You don't even like steak. Oh, I'll eat it. No, it's okay. I don't want you guys to go through the trouble. No, don't worry about it. And she's a spicy hot Latina. And she was like, no. You better bring my man some fish. Like, you need to stick up for yourself. But it was because I was raised in this sense and I had this such low sense of self-worth that I just wanted to be liked. I just wanted to be received by people. And anything that I could do to manipulate myself, to transform myself into being what I thought others wanted me to be, I thought brought me joy and happiness. And what it only did was squash the true person that I was and make it harder for me to find where I can find my true access to joy.
Mm-hmm. Whoo, you better preach. You bet preach. That's an interesting line to walk, right? Particularly if one of your spiritual gifts is pastoring or serving, right? And then you're always heard now this wonderful phrase that, you know, one of our contributors, Coach Mark James, Trust the Process. He always he talks about servant leadership and how that kind of leadership is sort of the goal and the aim of leaders who are truly seeking to lead. It's that service space. So how do you navigate then, right? The service that you are called to do and who you might even be talented and gifted to be, and then combat that against, you know, but you need to speak up and get your fish, not your steak.
And if I could just add one piece that's been a really helpful tool for me, I call it the gnashing of teeth test. If somebody asks me to do something and I know, because I was a yes man, like, oh, I'll do whatever. Yeah, you just say yes to everything. You're overwhelmed. But I found that the next time they walked into the room, I went, I don't want to see them. How do I avoid them? Or I just feel some kind of way because I did say yes. I was being codependent. I wasn't being truthful. Like I'm now holding bitterness and resentment towards someone. I'm gnashing my teeth. That's not on them. That's on me. I need to work on that.
Noosha, how about from your, especially when you have someone coming and filling out that intake? I'm sure there's a couple of modern physical addictions that I want to just throw in there. Screen addiction. Like, please tell me you've seen some people who might be like, you might need to turn that screen off.
That's a great point. Also, you know, being in the Bay Area where it's, you know, tech community is pretty prevalent. I would say, yeah, I think screen is definitely a thing, but also, and I think the pandemic has shed some light to this too. We kind of glorify people who are overworked, like work crazy hours, you know, or all, you know, like it's a thing, right? And I've noticed even when things have been opening back up, people have kind of gone right back to, or having to work from home immediately has also kind of allowed for that to become even more of a thing. But from a Chinese medicine perspective, like you're burning the candle from both ends, but you're also burning all your qi and blood, because usually those people are also eating at their desk. You're eating really quickly. You're not getting enough rest because you're on your screen all night, like until you go to bed, and then afterwards, and like maybe in the middle of the night, if you wake up, you're just like, oh, let me just check what messages I missed in the middle of the night, right? And you're also kind of always on, so your nervous system is hyper sensitive. It's like two aspects of nervous system. There's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, and Jasmyn, you probably talked to this too. So acupuncture puts you in parasympathetic, so rest and digest. We call the sympathetic as if like you're being chased by a tiger. And I think we're in this particular environment, we're always being chased by a tiger, even like it's a metaphorical one, but you're always like, you got to do this. There's like so many things you have to do. So acupuncture actually puts you in parasympathetic. And even if you go to sleep, you won't necessarily get really restful sleep. People they come in with a lot of insomnia. There's a lot of issues with sleep because no one has like good sleep hygiene, so many distractions. So not eating well, not drinking enough water, not getting enough rest. And they're just kind of like, they're in this culture of like, go, 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 go in this rat race. And I think a lot of that is kind of, they're part of this culture of like, that's what they need to do, but it's not really serving them and their bodies, and they're not aware of it. Like that, I think also further creates the disconnect between the mind and the body. Because, you know, you're just like, just going, and there's no, you know, you're not grounded, you're not getting proper nutrients, and what your body really needs.
Jasmyn, could that be a form of codependency as well? This like sort of need to be doing something?
Yeah, I think, you know, when you're looking at something that's not another person, right? Like this just enmeshment or tie into or over identification with doing. A lot of people, work has become their identity. And so when they're not working, they don't even know how to just be. And I often teach my clients, like, you've got to balance doing and being. You are a human being, you're not a human doing. We need to work. We need to be productive in order to live, you know, get our things that we need, resources and things like that. But life is not all on that, you know, that side of the spectrum of doing. And so, you know, it's really hard for people. I can't imagine. I do see clients that are Northern California, Noosha, and just some of their stress and inability to separate from their productivity is amazing. And so a lot of their work is just formulating new ways to think about what they're doing on a daily basis and their identity. So it kind of goes, you know, you're deconstructing some of that and like what it means to work and what are some other things in your life that are meaningful for you. So pulling that into is really important.
Noosha, I had a question before we go to our next poll. I'm anxious, and this is actually, we're going to get to this at the end. I'm anxious to see what techniques, as those of you, you know, in the medical profession or medical field in your own right, I'm anxious to see what you do personally to live out what you, you know, what you communicate to your clients and to your parishioners and so forth. But Noosha, I remember one acupuncturist that I had when I was living on another part of town. Sometimes between clients, she'd walk around and she'd have a needle just sticking out of her somewhere. And I was like, but now that you talked about what you're doing, I'm like, do you all walk around? Because you know what you need, essentially, right? You're the pro at it. So you're like, you know what? I have a foot ache or whatever. I'm having a bad day. Let me just stick one right in my cheek. Do you do that?
I love that. That's I love it. So I don't personally do that, but I can see people doing that. Usually I wouldn't be like treating patients while I'm doing, because the whole point is you're kind of meant to rest with needles in. We do have like ear seeds that are kind of like stickers. The ear is it's called the NADA protocol. It's actually used. A lot of people can get licensed, certified to just do the ear. They're actually specifically used for trauma. It was created in the Bronx, and it's called the Lincoln Detox Center. So this is a big part of, we're taught acupuncture too, but a lot of other health professionals, just other professionals, can use this, and they're sent to kind of trauma locate, like things when there's like if there's a natural disaster. So they're part of this like trauma team, because it really affects the nervous system and kind of calms you down, puts you on it. But I don't do that in particular. I do a lot of breathing in between patients. I wash my hands. I had a teacher that told me that, you know, if someone had a very emotional session, I wash from my elbow down with cold water. So that tends to, because, you know, you're working with your hands, things, you know, you can take it on in different ways, but especially if you're I'm very physically oriented, because I have a massage background as well. So kind of being able to clear that from my own body. And then the rituals after the fact, like, you know, the day after, if I have a longer day where I'm working, you know, if I'm resting more, I'm just kind of mindful, just like recalibrating all the time. I use a lot of things. I love nature. Nature is the best, like just breathing in great oxygen, going for a hike. And it can be small things or just meditation. And I do a bunch of other things. So I think once you have a kind of like a baseline, like you just have to slightly recalibrate, and you can tell like, whoa, that was a lot. I need to go, and like it's become kind of an automatic thing. And I think also in my profession, a lot of times people, they are giving too much. And like, I can relate to what Pastor Anthony said, like, you're kind of like, how do you separate that? That's something I've been very mindful of, because I want to do this for the long term. And I also want it to continue to feed me. It's a relationship, right? Like, I'm getting something when I'm giving too, right? And if I'm giving also from an empty cup, like no one's really benefiting from that. So finding little ways, and I noticed that, like I need like a weekend away, like every couple months or something, like, and finding out what that were. And then, I have my own life too, of however I'm living my personal life. And just, so there's little tricks you can do. I like that idea about using needles, but I don't know if I would walk around my clinic with it, but maybe on my break, just, do a little bit of that, but I love it. I mean, I can't knock that. That's great, because at least there's awareness. That's good. That's good.
That's great. Before we actually get into this poll, well, let me see. No, let's do the poll first, and then we'll go into the question. This is an interesting, just little interactive thing. Just kind of want to feel around for what some of our attendees feel from a sort of systemic, maybe a national thing. So here is the next poll question that we're going to release. What type of systemic issue do you think is frequently associated in cases of trauma care? So this would be, just to give a little bit of kind of understanding. So we're looking for like systemic issues, right? That someone might come to a professional for trauma care with. Maybe they have some generational bondage that they believe, and we would kind of popularize this as like, there's a family curse I want to, kind of identify. Physical or emotional abuse, life-threatening occurrences. This would be maybe PTSD, so war, maybe a car accident, as was mentioned by Noosha, and then toxic relationship. So a couple more seconds for that. What type of systemic issue do you think is frequently associated in cases of trauma or trauma care? All right, looks like all of the answers are in. Let's see. Let's tally this up. Okay. So physical or emotional abuse seems to be what the majority voted on. We have second up, either generational family bondage or toxic relationships. And then life-threatening occurrences was the last. So that was just sort of getting some opinions of what our participants think. And so to that point, Jasmyn, I just want to ask you, this is one of our last questions here before we go to our question and answer. To the point about some of those more systemic issues, what are some perspectives towards mental health that you feel are systemic, just in American culture? I kind of want to bring it here, local for the moment. So what are some of those things that you see in your particular demographic or community?
Yeah. So I think traditionally, we look at even just the diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which was like way back in the day referred to as shell shock. It was, veterans coming back from war and experiencing, nightmares and just difficulty acclimating back into life. And so trauma, I think traditionally would look at those sorts of life-threatening events or physical traumas, right? Because you have veterans that come back with injuries and different things like that. So I think in the traditional context, trauma care would cater probably more to, like sexual assaults, other life-threatening events, other physical traumas, whether that's domestic violence or child abuse, things like that. And what I see more of is those other two that you mentioned, the family trauma, generational trauma, as well as relationship trauma. So I work a lot with relationship trauma, people like kind of wanting to look into their relational patterns and where have these things come from and what have been, the relationships from my past, whether it was romantic or with family members that have significantly impacted me, and why can't I deal with relationships in a healthy way right now? So I think there's definitely a shift as far as where trauma care is focused, and definitely more traditionally we've looked at that more in like the physical trauma sense and life-threatening events, I would say.
Pastor Anthony, how about from your end?
It's interesting. Even as I saw that poll, I started to think like, in my experience, just personally in my life, I see how a couple of those different instances have interacted with each other and resulted in what I would call some generational trauma, generational curses. My father was in the Marine Corps. He fought in Vietnam at 19 years old, experienced some atrocities that he barely ever talked about. I've never heard a story, but I've heard a lot of them from my mom. But I see how that impacted my life in the sense of not wanting to connect with people because you will lose them, how it made him withdrawn and cause back. And he raised me to be that way, what it is to exemplify strength, what it is to not show emotion, and what that is to be a man, in which I then would pass down. So you see how one instance of trauma resulted in generational curses, that I had to come to a place within my own life where I had to say, hey, me saying that I'm not receiving that way of dealing with trauma or dealing with hurt based on the way that I was raised by my father is not dishonoring my dad. It's just me getting healthy. And there had to be simply be delivered out of that so that I could feel free to examine, hey, perhaps there's another way. And from a faith aspect, find that in the faith community, specifically find that in God. And I see that happening in church life. And as we encounter people, whether it's relational trauma, whether it's sexual trauma leading to a lifestyle or an appetite or a sexual addiction that is based out of some childhood experience that they had, or their need to be seen and approved, and they're being used to being sexualized and seeing that as a positive thing because that's the way that they have been seen or raised to see. And so having to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, if you will, be willing to go with people a little deeper to find out like what's the root cause of why you're feeling this way, and is it perhaps a healthy way to see yourself, see your sexuality, see your behavior, see your own way of viewing yourself. Or is there another way, a way that provides greater freedom, a way that provides deliverance, a way where your identity is not based in this thing that happened to you, but actually who you are in God?
So good. We're not defined by the occurrences of our life. That's huge. Although they could be defining moments. Noosha, how about for you? What are some perspectives towards mental health that you feel are systemic in our American culture?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I love what the other panelists just talked about. I think there's a very, very important, especially the generational aspect, I think has a lot to do with a lot of different things and how people process trauma and what is part of their story and has become part of their story, but isn't necessarily all of just themselves personally. So I see it as there's this thing of like no pain, no gain. Which is, I think, becoming a little problematic in the way of how, you have to suffer, you have to isolate, you have to suffer through a lot of these things yourself, and like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I think sometimes that thinking has become more detrimental because people are, and they're dealing with different things that are not speaking out. They're not seeking out all of these like wonderful different ways of help because they're like, oh, I have to do this on my own. And I just think some of those and also like how we think about like a lot of things that I do, people think what I do is woo-woo, right? We kind of know what that is. It's like this oh, it's not really real, it's placebo. Like the question I get asked all the time, like, does it really work? Like, what is it? You know what I mean? And it's, it's a medicine that's 5,000 years old. Like, I'm pretty sure like there's something to it, right? But not my place to kind of convince people otherwise. But I think there's just, some of these like belief systems that we have, like the no pain, no gain, just that's one thing that comes to my mind, limits us from seeking out all of these other resources that we really need and could be so beneficial. And I personally also, I think transcending whatever you were given is part of your responsibility when you create another generation. That's just my own thing too, of you need to kind of transcend some of those habits and beliefs because that made sense for our parents' generation at a particular time, but we live in a different time and place. So we need to not like perpetuate that cycle. It's a lot of work, but you will benefit from it and also future generations.
And that's a huge concept, right? There's this sort of responsibility. And as a parent, I know that I feel a responsibility to, and I think maybe you've heard it more popularized as, what is the saying? Oh, geez, I'm trying to think of the saying of like, you just want to make a better world for the next generation. But I think how you can be a little bit more intentional about that is to say, are there some things that worked for my generation and were maybe mannerisms or behaviors that were fitting for that generation because of the time and the resource, but I need to actually actively play a part in identifying what is not going to serve my son. My son's name is Lincoln. What's not going to serve his generation because we're not doing that or whatever the case might be, particularly with those generational that sort of generational bondage. I know in half of my, I'm half Mexican, and part of just the Latin culture is this sort of high matriarch reverence, right? This high matriarch respect towards the matriarchs of the family. But in some cases, we've seen in different relationships in our family that sometimes that was to the adverse effect, right? So it actually perpetuated this sort of domineering, sort of emasculating type of behaviorisms in some of the women. And so that's like, okay, how can I still bring this strong Latina tradition in my home, but kind of isolate what things are not going to serve our family? I think we have come to the time, Ms. Karen, for some chat questions. Do we have any?
Yes, I would love to offer up some of these to you all. So here's the first one. I think y'all might have touched on it a little bit, but do you feel there's a lack of social, emotional, or mental health learning in school that contributes to problems or traumas in mental health in adulthood?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think it's definitely evolving. I hear more of kids having, a mindfulness moment in class. So that's a time where they, pausing, checking in with how they feel, taking some deep breaths, which I think is so needed because school can be hard. When I hear about what some of the students are experiencing, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's tough. And so, yeah, I think that's a part of it, definitely, that the school system, because there's so much, a lot of learning does take place in school, that integrating more social emotional health and well-being support and education is definitely useful. So I think it's evolving. I hear more of that now as opposed to when I was in school.
Okay, so what are some steps that we can take towards learning to break patterns or addictions, etc.?
That's a great one. I would love, that's actually one of our last questions as well. Just from each of your perspectives, can you maybe give some strategy that you apply or some healthy habits that you've developed?
I can jump in here. I think this sense of, and I believe Jasmyn talked about it earlier, this sense of being overdoing. I can tell you from the faith background, like that productive addiction, that sense of I get my value over the more I do, is pervasive even in the church, even within faith leaders. And so the Bible has a lot of strong things to say about the importance of taking a Sabbath rest, like just rest. Believe it or not, you're not God. The world is going to continue to revolve whether you keep going or whether you stop. And so it's taking ourselves off the throne and putting Jesus on the throne where he really is. So a lot of the things that I find myself just encouraging people to do these days to preserve their own mental health is I'm saying, are you taking a Sabbath once a week? Are you resting, doing nothing? I'm talking about like not laundry, and it's like, whoa, there's not enough time in the week. There's no way I was like, the world will keep spinning. You'll be amazed. You'll wake up the next day and the sun will have risen again. It's going to be okay, but you need it. Are you, and then are we modeling that? I'm very conscious for me, as we're talking about generations, am I modeling that for my kids? Like, am I having fun? Am I still chasing them around the kitchen table? Or like, am I spending, is that, we've heard that old saying, like, work hard, play hard. Some of that time thing, I'm like, there's some wisdom in there. Like, I work really hard, as do all of us. I'm sure we all live very full lives. I want at the end of it to feel like, and I enjoy just as much of it. So am I being intentional? I ask myself, when is the last time I threw my head back and laughed out loud so much that my stomach hurt or I almost peed on myself? Like, being real. Like, and if I can't remember, then like, man, I'm missing out on the joys that God has for me. I need to be just as intentional about resting, just as intentional about having fun, just as intentional about giving love and encouragement to those in my life as I am about my own ambitions and passions and seeing my life move forward.
So good. So good.
I'm going to jump in really quick and say I'm so glad that we had the diverse group of panelists that we have today, because my faith is a huge part of self-care, being among my faith community. It's been a challenge in the pandemic year, but staying connected and making sure, being intentional about keeping those relationships and other, faith-based practices in my life has been integral, as well as acupuncture. So I do acupuncture, I do chiropractic care. My general philosophy is holistic in nature. Just got to take care of yourself, body, mind, spirit. And so I definitely attend to those things. And I also, again, speaking to what Pastor Anthony mentioned, not doing anything, like picking a day and just allowing yourself to just be and not do. Sometimes I have to block that out on my calendar. Like, I'm going to make sure I do it today, because I try to stick to my calendar. And also just doing things that refresh me, self-care things like hair, nails, being with friends who are refreshing, family who are refreshing. So I try to do all those things.
If we want to get in touch with any of our professionals here, we will make that information available for you. You can also drop whatever you want in the chat. If you want to also get even more support, maybe it does look like a therapy session. Maybe it does look like maybe a consultation with Pastor Anthony, or, seeing how Noosha remotely, even if you need, how Noosha can contribute to your life. Please do reach out. It can be anonymous. We have ways for you to get connected to this panel that could be anonymous if you wanted to. So please get in touch with us. Cara, can you please tell everyone how to get in touch and stay connected to TISO?
Of course, there's still more to come. Our community is very passionate about being a community that helps each other. So please sign up on our newsletter. There is more coming soon, so we would love to have you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again to our panelists. You can all come off mute and say goodbye. I thank you for your extra time. I know we've gone over, but thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Yes. Thank you for what you guys do. Your team is incredible, Sonia. Thank you so much.
Aw, thank you.
I would definitely second that. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Have a good week. We will see everyone soon.
You've been listening to The State of Events, where event professionals connect. For more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and Podbean. To engage with us on social media, look for @TISO Community. That's @TSOE Community. You can also visit our Facebook page, The State of Events. Make sure you stay connected by joining our newsletter. And lastly, we would love to hear from you. If you have topic suggestions, if you want to be a guest on the show, send us an email to inquiries@thestateofevents.com. That's inquiries@thestateofevents.com.